I've lived in this neighborhood for almost 10 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The HOA doesn't care about fairness. They care about control. And Karen, our unofficial neighborhood watchdog, takes that control to a whole new level. You know the type. Oversized sunglasses, fake smile, and a clipboard that's basically glued to her hand. She doesn't just follow the rules, she weaponizes them. But before I dive into what she did, let me tell you about James. James moved in next door about 6 months ago. He's in his late 60s, quiet, respectful, always smiling. And he's completely blind. Lost his vision after a surgery complication about a decade ago. He lives alone, but he's fiercely independent. Gets his groceries delivered, cooks for himself, and takes daily walks to keep active. His cane, white with the red tip, became a familiar sight on our block. I remember the first time I met him. I was unloading groceries from my car when I heard the unmistakable tap-tap of his cane on the sidewalk. I turned and saw him walking, slowly but confidently down the street. I greeted him, and he stopped and smiled. "Nice to meet you," he said, reaching out in my direction. "I'm James. Just moved in next door." We talked for a bit. I offered to help him with anything he needed, but he politely declined. Said he was used to doing things on his own, but appreciated the offer. Over the next few weeks, we became friends. I'd sometimes walk with him in the evenings, just to chat. He had a dry sense of humor and an incredible memory for voices. Then came Karen. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Karen would give James the same fake smile she gave everyone else. But then I started seeing her stare when he passed. She'd pause in her garden or stop mid-walk just to watch him, her mouth tightening like she was biting her tongue. One morning, I saw her standing by the HOA bulletin board with 2 other board members, whispering and glancing toward James's house. That sinking feeling hit me. I'd seen this before. Karen didn't like anything she couldn't control. And James, being disabled but independent, didn't fit into her little suburban fantasy. Then the gossip started. At a community BBQ, someone asked, "Hey, is it true James nearly tripped someone with his cane?" I blinked. "What? No, absolutely not." "Well," Karen said she saw it, said it's kind of a hazard. A hazard. That word echoed in my head. This man, who never bothered, a soul whose only crime was walking on the sidewalk with a mobility aid, was being talked about like a threat. I felt my stomach twist. I knew Karen was controlling, but targeting someone disabled? That crossed a line I didn't even think she'd approach. A few days later, I was outside watering my plants when James came walking by. He paused near my driveway. "Hey, can I ask you something?" he said. "Do you know someone named Karen?" I sighed. "Yeah, unfortunately." He nodded. "She told me I should consider walking somewhere else. Said my cane is disruptive and that some neighbors think it's unsafe." I stopped watering. My blood was boiling. "She what?" James just shrugged. "It's fine. I've dealt with worse. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining it." He wasn't. And I was done staying silent. That night, I called a few neighbors I trusted. Turns out Karen had already submitted a complaint to the HOA, labeling James's cane a navigational threat to pedestrians and a potential liability issue. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was a cane, a tool he needed to move around safely. What was next? Banning wheelchairs because they scratched the sidewalk. The next HOA meeting was in 2 days, and I was already preparing for war. The next HOA meeting felt different. Not just tense, but heavy. You could feel it in the air like something sacred was about to be stomped on. I arrived early, just to see who would show up. Karen, of course, strutted in like she was hosting the Oscars, clipboard in one hand and a smug little iced coffee in the other. Her face lit up the second she spotted me, like she knew I knew. What she didn't know was how much that night would change things. James wasn't there. He told me earlier that day he didn't want to cause drama. "I'm used to being overlooked," he said with a bitter little laugh. "I've got thick skin." But that was the problem. He shouldn't have needed thick skin just to exist here. The meeting began like usual. Budget updates, landscaping talk, the HOA president pretending he cared about community input. And then Karen raised her hand. "I'd like to revisit an item I submitted for discussion," she said sweetly, with that awful faux kindness she wears like perfume. It concerns pedestrian safety on community sidewalks. Here it comes. She stood, cleared her throat, and glanced at her notes like she was about to present a science fair project. There have been repeated incidents of individuals nearly being struck or startled by an obstruction on the sidewalks. Specifically, a long white cane used by one resident. It swings unpredictably and, frankly, poses a hazard to children, joggers, and the elderly. I felt the blood drain from my face. "She's talking about James," I said aloud. Not shouting, just letting it ring out into the room. Karen's eyes flicked toward me. "I'm not naming names, of course." "Right. Because that would make it too obvious." Someone else in the room, Mrs. Vaughn, I think, muttered, "You're out of line." But Karen pressed on like she didn't hear. "I'm simply suggesting we explore alternative arrangements. Perhaps suggest designated walking, hours, or a less crowded route. It's about safety, after all." I stood up. My hands were shaking. "James is blind," I said. "That cane is how he sees. It's not a weapon. It's not a threat. It's how he exists in this neighborhood." Karen didn't back down. "And no one is questioning that. But we also have to consider everyone's safety. Everyone isn't at risk. You're not afraid of his cane. You're afraid of what it represents, that someone different lives here and you can't control it." That made her jaw clench. She opened her mouth to speak, but the HOA president held up a hand. "All right, enough. Let's not let this get personal." "Personal?" I snapped. "She's trying to shame a disabled man for walking down the street. What part of this isn't personal?" Karen rolled her eyes. "He could just walk later in the evening, when fewer people are out. That's all I'm saying." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the cane. It was about erasing James, shrinking him down until he was quiet, invisible, inconvenient enough to ignore. Karen didn't want to share space. She wanted control over who got to belong. I didn't say anything more. I just sat down, my heart pounding. The rest of the meeting blurred together. I could feel eyes on me, some judging, some understanding. But I didn't care. I kept thinking about James sitting in his living room, probably listening to an audiobook, totally unaware that someone was trying to push him out of public life. When the meeting finally ended, I walked out in a daze. The cool night air hit me like a slap, and as I turned toward my car, I saw him. James was sitting on a bench across the street, cane resting beside him, like he'd been waiting the whole time. "You came?" I asked. He nodded. "Didn't want to cause trouble. Just wanted to hear what they'd say." I sat down next to him. "I wish you hadn't," I said softly. Karen went off. "She tried to make you sound dangerous." He didn't say anything, for a long time. Just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of crickets and distant lawn sprinklers. Then he spoke. Quiet, calm, too calm. "You know, I used to be a teacher," he said. "Middle school. Taught history and civics. Loved it. Every year, I'd start with the same lesson, about the Constitution, rights, equality. I believed in all of it." I looked over, surprised. "You were a teacher?" He smiled. "Until I lost my sight. Then they told me it would be too disruptive for students. Said the cane might trip them. Said I could stay on as an administrator, behind a desk. Quiet, hidden." My chest tightened. "I moved here hoping things would be different," he continued. "But I guess the world still wants people like me to take up as little space as possible." I felt tears sting my eyes. Not just because of what he said, but because he said it without bitterness. Like he'd carried that pain so long, it had just become part of him. I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. "You belong here, James. And I'm not going to let anyone take that from you." He didn't say anything. Just nodded once. That quiet kind of gratitude that hurts more than anything loud ever could. The next morning, I woke up with a fire in my chest. Karen wanted to make James invisible, then it was time to make him seen. I wish I could tell you that the HOA immediately shut Karen down after the meeting, that they saw through her passive-aggressive complaints and decided to stand up for what was right. But that's not what happened. 3 days after the meeting, a formal notice showed up taped to James's front door. I was outside watering my plants again, Seems like I'm always doing that when things go sideways. When I saw him standing there, hand moving across the paper like he was trying to read it by feeling the ink, he heard me approaching. "It's from the HOA, he said quietly. "I think they're asking me to change my walking routine." He held it out to me. I took it, read it, and felt my jaw clench so tight I thought my teeth would crack. "To ensure the continued safety and comfort of all residents, we request that any mobility aids or walking assistance devices be used only during off-peak community hours, before 7 a.m. or after 9 p.m. This is not a punitive measure, but a courtesy request to avoid unintended incidents." I couldn't believe it. They didn't ban his cane outright, but they might as well have. They were telling him he could only go outside when no one else was around, that his presence in broad daylight was a nuisance. James stood there, his face unreadable. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said. "Maybe I should just walk earlier, or later." "Absolutely not," I snapped. "This isn't your problem to fix. You haven't done a single thing wrong." But I knew what was happening. I could see it in his body language, the way his shoulders sank, the way he folded the letter gently, like it didn't deserve the rage I felt. He was already used to being pushed aside. And worse, part of him believed he should stay there. Not on my watch. I called the HOA office myself and demanded an explanation. They told me, politely of course, that multiple residents had expressed safety concerns about James's cane, and that they were simply trying to minimize conflict. I asked them if they'd ever received an actual complaint about James harming anyone. They hadn't. I asked them if they'd ever consulted anyone with expertise in disability law or accessibility. They hadn't. I asked them why they were listening to gossip instead of defending a vulnerable neighbor. They didn't have an answer for that. But they did say this: "We're trying to keep the peace. It would help if everyone just followed the guidelines. Keep the peace." As if James was the problem. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind, the way Karen twisted things, the way the HOA folded like paper, and worst of all, the way James accepted it, and I kept thinking about something he'd said. "I guess the world still wants people like me to take up as little space as possible." I wasn't going to let that happen again. The next morning, I walked over to James's house. He was sitting on the porch, listening to a book with his earbuds in. When he saw me coming, he smiled. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept better than I did." I sat down beside him. "I've got an idea." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I think it's time Karen and the HOA learn what it's really like to live in this neighborhood with a disability." He chuckled softly. "You planning to make them walk around blindfolded or something?" I smiled. "Exactly." He paused. "You're serious." "Dead serious." We spent the rest of the day planning. I put out a post in the neighborhood group, carefully worded, to help raise awareness about accessibility and the daily challenges faced by our neighbors with disabilities. "I'm organizing a walk without sight experience this weekend. You'll be blindfolded and walk a marked path using a cane guided by a volunteer. It's not a protest, it's education." To my surprise, people started responding, curious, supportive. A few eye-roll emojis, probably from Karen's burner account, but most folks seemed genuinely interested. Even the local community center offered to help. They provided safety cones, blindfolds, and even a few volunteers trained in disability awareness. When I told James, he looked stunned. "You did all that in one day?" "No," I said. "We did." That Saturday morning, we set up the path, starting from the community center parking lot, looping through the sidewalk routes James usually took, and ending back at the park. We had signs along the way that read, "Cane detected a crack in the pavement. Dog barking nearby. Guess which direction? Someone just left their trash bin in your path. Karen's flower pots block the sidewalk here." Each one marked a real challenge James had mentioned facing. People came, more than I expected. Families, teens, even some HOA board members, though Karen was nowhere to be seen. One by one, they put on blindfolds, took up training canes, and started the walk. I stood at checkpoints, guiding them, gently correcting their path when they veered. I saw grown adults flinch at a sudden car horn. I watched teenagers laugh nervously when they bumped into bushes. I heard kids say, "Wait, How is this even legal? When they tripped over a crooked sidewalk slab, and somewhere in the middle of it all, I saw James, standing off to the side, listening, smiling. Later, one woman came up to me and said, I had no idea it was that hard. I just thought, I don't know, that the cane handled everything. Another man said, this neighborhood isn't even remotely accessible. That's on us. Exactly. We didn't just raise awareness that day. We held up a mirror. And for the first time, people really looked. After the awareness walk, something shifted in the neighborhood. People who had barely looked at James before now waved when he passed. One neighbor offered to fix the uneven section of sidewalk near the park. A teenage boy even stopped by his house one afternoon and asked if James would mind giving a short talk at his school's Disability Awareness Week. But the biggest shift? Karen went silent. No new HOA complaints. No snide emails. Not even one of her usual passive-aggressive posts in the neighborhood group about maintaining standards. It was eerie, like the queen bee had lost her sting, until the next HOA meeting. It was 2 weeks after the walk. James wasn't going to go, but I asked him to come with me. You need to see what your presence does to people, I told him. He sighed, but agreed. All right, but I'm not making any speeches. I'll sit. I'll listen. When we walked in, the room got quiet. Not tense, just aware. James had that effect now. Karen was already seated in the front row, tapping something into her phone. When she looked up and saw him, I swear I saw her flinch. Just for a second. The meeting started. Usual nonsense. Then Karen raised her hand. I'd like to revisit a topic we addressed previously, she said. Her voice was syrupy again, fake sweet. The kind of tone you use when you're about to say something awful and want to coat it in sugar. A number of residents have expressed concern about disruptions caused by recent events in the neighborhood, she began. Specifically, activities that, while well-meaning, were conducted without formal HOA approval and may have created discomfort for certain individuals. My blood ran cold. She was talking about the awareness walk. Karen smiled. No one is against inclusivity, of course, but we also need to think about community harmony. I think, going forward, we should require that any public activities involving mobility aids, visual impairments, or other sensitive topics be approved by the HOA in advance. It's just a matter of keeping the peace. I stood up. That walk changed lives, I said. It educated this community in a way that you refuse to. Karen crossed her arms. It made people uncomfortable. Good, I snapped. It should have. Because James lives every single day navigating discomfort most of us can't even imagine. And the fact that you want to regulate awareness is proof that you still don't get it. She tilted her head. I'm simply trying to protect residents who may have felt pressured to participate in an activity they didn't support. You weren't even there, I said. How would you know what anyone felt? Karen's smile slipped. Just a little. That's when I decided to throw the curveball. You know what, Karen? I said, stepping toward the center of the room. Let's clear up any confusion. Why don't you experience what James goes through every day? She blinked. Excuse me? Let's do the walk, I said. Right now. You, me, James. Blindfolds. Canes. The same path. No tricks, no edits. Just reality. There was a pause. Then a soft murmur in the room. A few people even nodded. Karen laughed, thin and forced. I don't think this meeting is the time or place for that. Why not? I said. It's exactly the right time. If you're going to claim his cane is a hazard, at least have the decency to experience what he actually sees. I looked at the HOA president. Let her walk a few steps in his shoes. He looked caught off guard, but, to his credit, he shrugged. It's not a formal vote, but I think we'd all benefit from a little perspective. And then, unbelievably, Karen said, Fine. If it'll end this nonsense, I'll do it. We went outside. Someone found a spare blindfold from the awareness walk in the back of my car. James handed her one of his backup canes. Karen hesitated, before taking it, like it might burn her hand. I led her to the start of the path, blindfolded her, and gently turned her to face the sidewalk. She stood stiff, cane in hand like a prop in a play she didn't want to be in. All right, I said. Just walk straight. Try to find your way to the mailbox. 10 feet. She took 1 step, then 2, then stumbled off the edge of the sidewalk. Into the grass. Careful, I said. Feel with the cane first. She gritted her teeth and tapped. The cane hit the curb. She flinched. A few more steps. She veered wildly to the left, bumped into a trash bin, and let out a startled yelp. Someone— "Move that!" she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "That's where it always is. That's James's daily path." She stood frozen, breathing hard, and then James spoke. Quiet, but firm. "That bin's been there for weeks. I asked 3 times for someone to move it. No one did." Karen didn't say anything. "You get to take off that blindfold," he continued. "I don't." I let the silence hang in the air. Let it sink into everyone watching. After a long moment, Karen reached up and removed the blindfold. She looked different, shaken, embarrassed, but most of all, small, like someone who had just realized how enormous a world she had never tried to see. She handed the cane back without a word. James took it gently and said, "Thank you for trying." Karen walked away without saying anything. The crowd parted for her like water. Back inside, no one talked much. The rest of the meeting fizzled out, but what needed to happen had already happened. Later that night, James and I sat on my porch again. "You think she'll change?" he asked. I shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe not." "But they saw it," I said, motioning back toward the HOA hall. "They all saw it, and now they know." He nodded. "That's enough for me." It's funny how quickly things can change in a neighborhood when people finally see the truth. In the weeks after the blindfold walk, the entire HOA dynamic began to shift. It wasn't some dramatic revolution, just a slow, quiet unraveling of the power Karen once held over people. It started with small things. The HOA newsletter changed its tone. Instead of passive-aggressive warnings about non-compliant behaviors, it began including friendly reminders about accessibility, reminders to keep walkways clear, and even a short note about the importance of empathy in a community setting. Then came the policy updates. The board introduced a new section in the bylaws: community inclusion and accessibility. It wasn't just fluff. It required that any future complaints involving a resident's mobility aid or disability must be reviewed by an outside consultant trained in ADA compliance. That part came from me. I found a nonprofit willing to offer their services for free. They also scheduled the first accessibility walkthrough of the neighborhood, a full audit of broken sidewalks, low-hanging branches, and anything that could obstruct someone like James. And speaking of James, he started walking with his head higher, literally. I saw it every morning, where he used to walk tentatively, with shoulders slightly hunched and ears constantly alert for judgment. Now he moved with quiet pride. People would greet him by name. Kids waved. Some even asked if they could try the cane just to see what it's like. He laughed the first time a 6-year-old tried and promptly poked herself in the shin. "It's harder than it looks, huh?" he said gently. But the biggest change? Karen. I didn't expect it. Not really. I'd seen too many people like her, stubborn, self-righteous, clinging to their imagined authority like it gave them purpose. So when she knocked on my door a month after the meeting, I was bracing myself for round 2. She looked tired. No makeup, no clipboard, just Karen in a plain sweater, holding something in her hand. "Hi," she said. I opened the screen door. "Karen." She glanced down. "I wanted to return this." She held out the cane James had loaned her during the walk. The backup. One. I didn't even know she still had it. I took it gently. "Thanks." There was a long pause. Then softly, "I didn't know. Didn't want to," I said. She nodded. "That's true." I almost didn't believe what I was hearing. But then she looked up and I saw it. The vulnerability. The kind of shame that doesn't come from being embarrassed, but from realizing you were wrong. "I've spent so long controlling everything," she said. "I thought it made the neighborhood better, cleaner, safer." She hesitated. "But I think I just made people smaller, especially people like James." I didn't say anything. I just let her speak. I've stepped down from the board, she said. That surprised me. You did? She nodded. Told them they need fresh eyes, different voices, people who've actually listened instead of judged. She looked off into the distance, then back at me. You think James would consider joining the board? I blinked. I don't know, but I can ask. She smiled a little. Good. I think people would actually follow him. He's not loud, but he's steady. After she left, I stood on the porch for a long time, just holding that cane. Later that evening, I walked over to James's house. He was on his porch, sipping tea, earbuds in. Got a visitor today, I said, sitting down beside him. He smiled. Karen? I raised an eyebrow. How'd you know? She left me a voicemail. Said she owed me a bigger apology than she had the words for. He chuckled softly. Didn't expect that. I handed him the cane. She returned this. He held it, fingers tracing the grip. Strange, isn't it? Something like this, something so small, can carry so much weight. I looked at him. You carry more than anyone knows, James. But you made them see it. You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You just kept walking. And that changed everything. He looked thoughtful for a moment. You know, I used to think being quiet made me invisible. But maybe sometimes the quietest people are the ones who shift the ground. Exactly, I said. And for what it's worth, Karen wants you to join the board. He nearly choked on his tea. Me? Really? You? Really? He laughed. Well, guess they're finally ready for a board member who doesn't drive a golf cart. We sat there laughing, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like we were fighting anymore. We were healing. James did join the board. He served quietly, humbly, and with incredible grace. At the next community meeting, he introduced a new initiative called Walk in My Shoes, a yearly event where residents could experience what it's like to navigate the neighborhood with various disabilities. Karen? She stayed out of the spotlight, but she helped from the sidelines, quietly donating to the accessibility nonprofit, volunteering during events, listening more than she spoke. And when people brought up the old days, she didn't get defensive. She just said, I'm learning. I've still got a long way to go. And that's growth. We weren't just a group of houses anymore. We were a community, one that saw people like James, valued them, and stood up when they were treated unfairly. And it all started with a cane, a woman who saw injustice, and a neighborhood that finally opened its eyes.